Welcome to this replay of one of the sessions from the Council of Competitive Intelligence Fellows 2022 Summit, Foresight Now, Harness the Future. We would like to thank our gold sponsors, Aurora WDC, Crayon, and Tyson Hines for their support. We would also like to thank our executive sponsors, the Business Intelligence Source, Commentelli, and Knowledge Inform. Please enjoy this session replay.
Wow. This session, and it's really, really ironic that I cannot remember, exactly what we called the summit, except, how to harness dark, D-A-R-Q, matters, which is really ironic when you think of quantum matters. But anyways, let's bring in Cynthia Chen Coriega, who is my co-panelist, co-moderator. I'm not sure. What are we giving you the title as? My
fellow, we'll keep it simple.
fellow, exactly, fellow. And really to explain and to give the definition of what we mean by dark, I'm going to have Cynthia do that because I just flew across the transatlantic. I'm a little jet lagged, but not quite jet lagged. So forgive me if I slip. I don't want to ever in this session slip into complete tech speak. So I'm just letting everybody know that I'm going to try not to do that. But Cynthia will be here to rein me back in because we don't want to turn this into a technology conference. We want this to be about foresight and how applications of technology can help foresight. So Cynthia, give the definition of dark, please.
Oh, well, yeah. And before we do that, though, let's bring in our colleague August and let's make it a party.
Oh, yeah. Come on, August.
He's the wings as well. And I think it's really important. And so I do want to underscore before we begin that this session is very much about how we are going to take foresight methods and our approaches and practices to understand technological developments, because that is huge. And that is a major challenge, not just for folks who practice foresight, but for folks who dabble in foresight and then folks in between. And so it's really important that we provide this public service. And it's also on the level of our summits as well, where we dive deeply into areas or delve into areas and dive deeply into areas that are underserved and underdiscussed. So there's a lot out there on technology. There's no lack of that. But I don't think that there's enough, and I think that you'll agree because we have this session talking about how we can harness the various tools to understand this for what we do efficiently, effectively, and so forth. And so this particular topic, is an interesting one because, of course, the DARQ acronym exists, but when we talk about technology, we are really talking about other types of technology beyond the D and DARQ, the distributed ledger technology. So that's represented by, various types of technologies, like blockchain, right? And various types of distributed assets. And then artificial intelligence or AI, and there's a lot there. So I don't think we necessarily need to go into the definitional aspects of it in this group. And then also the R part is really it represents extended reality, which also covers artificial reality, AR. It covers mixed reality. So all the R's, right? All the various realities as represented by extended reality. And then the Q is quantum computing. And so that really is a newish form of computing. It's been in the works where traditional computing is represented by binary on-off switches, if you will, ones and zeros, binary states. But with quantum computing, we're talking about using qubits, which have those various polar states, but also in-between states as well, which creates a lot more opportunities to be able to represent data. And so the idea here is, the projection is that it's going to be 158 million times faster than the processing today. Yeah, I can't even fathom that. And so that's what DARQ represents in this various facet. But I think for our conversation too, we can also touch on synthetic biology, advanced and applied materials, a whole everything.
The thing is with this area, it intersects every aspect. As we all know about technology, technology is intertwined with everything we do today. From the moment that we're born, technology, actually, before that. You can talk about conception. I mean, because it depends on how you were conceived. It depends on the equipment they used to monitor when you were in the womb. Everything in our lives now is touched by technology. But the thing is, when you have things, aspects like quantum computing, and you're thinking about the foresight of what quantum computing could potentially do in the future for medical procedures, it's really very mind blowing. But we also have to understand the aspects that it's extremely expensive. And people seem to think that every new technology that comes about, we're going to be using it in 10 minutes. And quantum computing has been around for a, a long time.
20 years,
And
something like that. Yeah.
yeah, it's 20 years since 2002, I think was pretty much when it was like quantum computing. But it's only been in the like maybe the last 4 years that we've really been able to see how far it's developed. And so when you're thinking about foresight, think about those foresight professionals, probably some of you in here, that were around 20 years ago hearing about this. Like, how would they even have acknowledged what this is and the potential usage for it in the future? And that blows my mind to think about. There were people 20 years ago in our profession hearing about this, hopefully, and what has happened in the preceding years. Like, what did they think? Because I don't believe enough has been done about when we find out about new technologies, how to integrate it into what we do as CI professionals. And you know what? I just want to say one thing before we continue. Students, I know that you know a lot about this, far more advanced than even people that are knee deep in the technology professionally. So I want to see questions, I want to see comments, I want to see robust discussion, because I just know there's a lot of brain power out there. Just from Eric's comment alone, I know there are a lot of students out there that are knee deep in this. They're using this in their research, they're using this in their class studies. I mean, I'm a Mercyhurst grad, and I know if you're a Mercyhurst grad, you're using this way, way more advanced than many of us in the field. So please bring it up, because it helps me to level up a little bit more, because just to make the discussion more interesting. But you know what? I was just saying to August and Cynthia that yesterday a paper came out by Alamos Labs, and they were talking about neural networking and the advances of, well, neural networking computing. And that for me, when I'm thinking about foresight, it's the joining up of all aspects of intelligence moving forward. Like, how are we going to be utilizing that? And that's what I really like that, Cynthia Babbage. Exactly. Like, how are we going to be moving that into what we do? I mean, that is the ultimate question. And that's what we're really here to talk about. Like, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? All right, you can shout out the Mercyhurst people. You're going to distract me, and I'm jet lagged, so I'm easily distracted. The one thing I do want to talk about, let me just look at my notes here, is we know that the one thing I know that I'm focused on a lot heavily is quantum computing. It is actually the AR aspects, extended reality aspects of the metaverse and of Web3 and what's going on there. So I will get a little bit, just keep dragging me back, because I'll just start going a little bit too deep on the technology, Cynthia. And I know that that is not what this session should be. What we want to do here is talk about how we as professionals, the students here, how we can have Terry says this
Nice,
conversation is
Terry.
a
Yep.
shameless plug for his book. So please, if you are connect to Terry, and you can read all about his book and also read his book. What these technologies can do in our jobs, in our careers, in our sector, and how we are able to utilize them in order to make what we do better, to make what we do more proactive instead of reactive. And that's where I think that these technologies will help with foresight. It will help, not so much predictive. I don't think predictive is ever the right word, because Well, that's a whole nother discussion. I always think predictive implies a sort of a godlike mentality when we're talking about what we do, but definitely being able to help people understand what may potentially happen in the future. And you have technologies like uh, distributed ledgers. You have decentralized um, everything. You can talk about cryptocurrency. We can talk about the blockchain. So, what's interesting when you look at something, say, like the blockchain, and you're looking at maybe something like NFTs? Like, how exactly, when you are looking at that, do we build that into our CI functions, into helping people understand foresight? That's what I want to, that's what I really want people to talk about here. What do you think, Cynthia? Actually, August, I know that you are getting into that whole area a lot. And I'm wondering what you're seeing out there. This is really about what we're seeing. People put it in the chat, put it in the chat. Yes,
Yeah,
Karen, anticipate rather than predict.
yes. Well, one of the things that I come to this topic, I really appreciate the framing of, the focus here is on application of technology. Kind of adjacent to that, from my point of view, is really looking for the veteran foresight professionals, or the students who have fresher perspectives on these technologies. When I think about the fundamental transformation that these four technologies, and if we expand the aperture to include biometrics and other things as well, and advanced material sciences, we're taking it out even further. But what I'm about to say still holds, is you're talking about sets of technologies that by themselves are going to drive fundamental transformations to the economy, business, and also ultimately in a lot of ways to society. Um, and I tried not to, get too excited or too hyperbolic, and hopefully I'm not being too much in that regard. But when I think about foresight and developing foresight about anything, I can't help but think about foresight in the context of those fundamental transformations,
Yeah.
as kind of like a meta influencers to literally everything that we do. So, it's almost like turning around to this professional community, looking at a technological transformation, and even saying, like, how do you even do your job in the context of what just feels so overwhelming to me? And maybe one of the first things that a seasoned foresight professional will do is kind of like talk me down about maybe the biases or the misperceptions I have about how fundamental those transformations are going to be. Or, Suki, taking it back to your point about quantum computing, how fast they're really going to arrive. Because I think I fall into this trap all the time, where I think, like, oh my God, tomorrow we're going to be trading NFTs on the moon, and we're going to be wearing, virtual reality headsets and that sort of thing. But it's probably not happening tomorrow.
So I always let people know there are certain things that they really should realize. The challenges with quantum computing. One, it's expensive. Just
Mm-hmm.
you think about qubits just in the physical sense, in their physical state, have to be super, super cold. Um, Not environmentally friendly, which of course then increases the expense. And as we all know, just in the fact of chips alone, how you're actually manufacturing those chips, not cheap. World resources and where we actually find the materials to manufacture chips, all of these things people are not considering. So when you think of it as a CI professional, you're starting at the very base. You're thinking about the materials that actually go into how you're building the hardware, let alone the software factor. It's the hardware, because in order for it to function in the cloud, it has to actually exist physically, be able to program something, be able to actually store it. So super, super expensive. And while that's great and fine and dandy, those are things that people need to consider when they're actually talking about their stakeholders about how you're going to utilize something like quantum. You have to let them know the realistic aspects of cost, super expensive. So don't think you're going to be throwing this out there in like nanoseconds, as we know, nanoseconds. No, it doesn't happen. It's not happened. It's already been nulled, I think, in MRI scans, quantum computing, because it is so expensive. it's a non-play right now. It's basically dead in the water.
Well, and also it's not just the priciness of it. The reason why it's pricey, the reason why it needs to remain cold is because qubits are notoriously volatile.
Yep.
And so you need stability and reliability if you are computing at that level, right? You know, all the hopes and promises and dreams and all the stakes that are involved in that. And so this is where it gets very easy to start getting into the push-pull of, oh, the promises of this new technology, and that's just, I'm just choosing one, right? And here's where it can go wrong. And you're constantly getting pushed and pulled as you're hearing both sides. You have that little angel, little devil, and before you know it, it's going to drive you crazy. And that's just only one facet of technology. Never mind that, then let's add another one that's decades in the making that also is, you know, is the word is, it's, you know, it's sort of on the cusp of, you know, of real breakthrough is nuclear fusion, right? So that's another one that's very much like qubits, and it's not like quantum computing. So how do we manage that? So let's take a step back here, because what we really need to do here as practitioners is to have a framework to work with. And granted, there are a number of different foresight frameworks that we can use, right? All the various tools that we can use, like, you know, the scenario has been brought up today, you know, futures wheel, even something simple as timeline analysis, you know, fishbone analysis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what we also need to do is, when we process all of these inputs, is to have the right mental frame in doing this, so that we're not overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the technology that is there at our disposal, right, to conduct the analysis. And so the first thing I like to do when I'm conceiving of this vast domain is to consider the different facets, different types of innovative futures, right? So let's just pick one. Let's just think about, oh, we've been talking about quantum. So let's pick that. And as we use the various tools, you identify the possibilities, the opportunities, as well as, well, first focus on the possibilities and the opportunities. And I like to do this first because it expands your mind so that you're not locked in and creating barriers and blockages, you know, towards envisioning different future states, right, and different applications. So that's the first thing I like to do, is to kind of open up the mind, you know, and keep it open. Then what you need to do is to rein yourself in. And this is where you identify dependencies and barriers from that state. So once you've opened up yourself to, this is where this could be going, you know, along these various tracks. You mentioned healthcare, right? You know, for quantum computing, but there are plenty of other applications to it. That's just one thread, and MRIs is just another narrower one.
Yep.
And so as we do all this, you start thinking, okay, what about, right? You go through that first exercise, and then you start thinking, well, but what then? Right? Or, you know, what might be potential dependencies and barriers that can impede all of these brilliant future states that in future applications that I've been envisioning, right? So make sure that the first two, you apply the first two first to expand the mind, then you apply the third step to look at the potential limits. In this way, what you're doing is you're unmooring and disengaging from your current assumptions and perspective, because that's the other barrier that I see when people are analyzing technology, is that we see future applications of technology and future technological states through our current lens. We're anchored to the current applications and possibilities. And so we're inherently limiting ourselves. And I even see practitioners, experts doing this as well, because it's just the way that we're wired, unless we're really practiced at this. And so you want to break this into segments. You want to be methodical about this. You want to start to break out of your assumptions, you know, and your anchors, and then you surround yourself and you bounce this off of other visionary colleagues who also have different perspectives and areas of expertise, because you can't be expert in everything. So I rely on my colleagues in having these conversations about these different threads. And it's got to be people. Stop reading just the white papers and go to where the people are. And by the way, if you don't have access to people, There are other people who have access to people.
Mhm.
So what I like to do, and by the way, YouTube is gold, because there are a number of people who are futurists focusing on general, futures and various facets of futures, or people who just focus on the future of work or other specific niche areas. And they're out there talking to people. And so they can serve as your proxies. And these are really important ways to be able to open up your mind and at the same time ground yourself so that you're not feeling overwhelmed by the technological flood that's happening. And by the way, just as a wrap up, I do want to mention that last year during our summit, Facebook announced that they were Meta, right? So that was sort of the big news that occurred during our summit. This year, well, you mentioned the paper that came out, Suki, but now we've got Ethereum, talking about their grand new announcement as well over our summit. So this is a pattern that I would welcome, actually. Annually, if we can coincide with all of these sort of really nifty tech announcements and discussions. So anyway, so I hope I've given us some things to talk about here in terms of how we might approach this to maintain our sanity, but also importantly to ensure that we're seeing what we are meant to see, because it is systematic. Going back to my conversation with Maeve this morning, Maeve Curran, this has got to be a systematic process. So if it is a systematic process, then we're inoculating ourselves from a lot of the missteps.
And that systematic process is also one of the points I made earlier about it. Also, that's me. Sorry. There, that's done. Is also about it being iterative, and that we are consistently making sure, okay, that is not me. That echo is making sure that we are also at every step of the way integrating all of the other aspects. This is the problem, not a problem. This is one of the actual benefits of being in our field, is that we always are having to pull in different methods, different matters every step of the way of every process that we're doing. It can't just be one thing. We have this will, and there are other cogs in that will constantly. And as you said, it is about reaching out to those other experts. This is one of the biggest issues with technology, is that they don't often speak to those other experts, which is why we get technology that's rubbish. I mean, that's why we get garbage in,
CI
garbage
tools.
out. Yeah, and when they're not having that diversity of thought, and it's not just diversity of people, it's actually diversity of brain pattern, who's actually putting their thought process, who's actually applying their wisdom to a product. And when you're looking at a subject like quantum or the metaverse or whatever, you also have to look about, as we all know, the thing that everybody doesn't want to think about, but we all have to, is security. And it is that quantum in its whole entirety, when you think about it, the thing that it will very much underline in dangerous aspects is encryption. Because if you can decrypt that quickly with quantum, that's very dangerous. But we're not at that point completely, but it will be coming, and that's one of the biggest questions. So us as CI professionals, how are we going to be talking to each other about how we implement any security aspects for our clients, the work that we're doing, and especially for those that are working in national security? Like, how are you going to enable? What are you thinking? How are you thinking about this? How are you applying that to what you're doing now? Because it's something that is not just coming, it's pretty much already here. We've seen.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, like, we've seen when websites have been hacked, how very quickly you can, not even going there, like when you put up an account on a social media site, how fast those bots come. That is the very early onset of something like quantum. Quantum will be that much faster. It's basically, you think it's there.
Yeah. Well, we're getting, so I think with this point, we're getting into the process of the what if, what abouts, right? What, the various implications. And this is where, again, for people who are not necessarily practiced in this, it can get pretty hairy very quickly, because it's not, all these questions aren't just about the security implications, because there are certainly, if we look at the threat category, it's not just security, but there's also, various types of propagandistic and, and messaging threats and various others as well, physical security as well as cybersecurity, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things, again, so I think one of the things that we need to do as practitioners to create some sanity and to ensure that we have a solid inventory of what we need to be focused on, that we minimize the gaps, right, within these inventories, and that we can also have this inventory from which to prioritize, right, for our organizations, because otherwise, again, it's fire hose time. So one of the things I like to do actually is this a very simple tool of the futures wheel, right? So you start with a starting point, and then the futures wheel just takes you to the next level, the next level, and next level in terms of actions, implications, reactions, and so forth. And this way, you also have potential paths that you can prioritize. You color code that and highlight and so forth. And you can use this as a basis of dialogue and conversation with decision makers and foresight users in your own organization, so you can get more out of them. And as a part of that iterative process, that it has to be within the foresight practice. And then as you do this and combine with other types of tools, you also start to find some techniques to harness what August has posted, right, about all the different time horizons and time factors that you have to deal with. So you can harness time if you can see the components, and then it's not just the X and a Y axis of the typical two-dimensional components, but you add the Z axis for the time component, and now you're able to work your way through that component, right? With just even the simple 2x2 matrix that we're often accustomed to. So it's all about trying to find the right mental frames and systematic processes, integrating that along with the well-known tools that we already have at our disposal. If we're just focused on the tools and we don't have a process and we don't have a regimen or a system as a part of this, well, toss the tools out the window. It's a fire hose. At best, it's a mess. So anyway, I'll take a step back here because it's so easy.
I think that's actually been one of the problems with our field, is that with technology, I mean, I've always said that for technology, especially social media, we should have been there at the beginning, but it's because we didn't have a process. Nobody actually thought of a process on how to deal with it effectively, about what you should do, what you could potentially do with it. And then it's here. And then we're having to sort of backward integrate that into what we do. So we're now at something that is very much at the forefront. We need to be building those processes now in order to help these students that are here on this summer, because they should be right now helping us understand how to build it, because they're going to be the ones that are going to have to utilize this in the future, and they're going to be dealing with that next generation afterwards. So we need to be able to set up those frameworks and say, hey, at least we have something. It's probably going to change every week because that's how fast the technology is going. So please do share your comments, share your insights, because I think a lot of people have shared some. I know that there are people that have used this in projects. I know they have.
Can I say something that's potentially controversial here?
Oh, yes, please.
This is something that's really important to me, and I think some of you have heard me say this privately. But your point about social media, Suki, and how that was a missed opportunity, is a really good one. And that was a failure of our imagination. That was a failure of, I think, to a large degree, to our understanding of technology that was in place. And I think we're at risk of making that same mistake with the metaverse, whatever that will look like, right? In its various, sort of time horizons. So, but I think what really gets in our way is not just those specific aspects. I think sometimes, as Intel practitioners, and I think Intel practitioners more than foresight practitioners here, we are too self-assured in our ability to conduct foresight. I think we embrace the label of foresight, and we've convinced ourselves that we really, really do it. When we compare our foresight work with people who are dedicated foresight practitioners, it's miles apart.
Miles apart.
And when you look at the various surveys on the type of foresight analytics or analysis frameworks that are used, there are various there have been various studies along the way, and the survey show that the less than 25% of SCIP practitioners even use scenario analysis. So how are we foresight practitioners if we're basically limiting ourselves to that tool and less than a quarter of us are using that tool? Of course we're going to miss these things because we're not focused on it. And then when we're not focused on it, we're also not having conversations about it. And so we're really not understanding the nuances and the implications about this, because these are very, very complex topics. And so when I have conversations about these things, they're not typically with CI practitioners.
Exactly.
Typically
and that's one of the areas that for me personally has always been sort of a little sticking point, because as many people know, when it came to Twitter and it came to using social media, I mean, I think I was actually lucky because I was at Mercyhurst when the time when sort of we started using Skype. We got to test out, the whole old Google Earth before, when it was Keyhole. So we were using that really in the early days. And when Twitter happened, which was early in my career, I was one of the first people to use it. And I started using it in my collection efforts, working in pharma in order to track down pharma professionals. That's what I was doing, figuring out what clinical trials was. But a lot of that was poo-pooed by my employer at the time. They said, well, that's not valid. That's not a valid way to say that's where a clinical trial is taking place. And I was saying, you can pinpoint the doctors that are involved in that area of therapeutic research with the clinical trial location, because you had that data. And they were saying that was not valid. And now, of course, it's what everybody does. And so what I'm seeing now with just NFTs, what's happening in the metaverse with quantum, is that a lot of people are not really taking on board that this is something that you can use in order to help your stakeholders, in order to figure out. It's not a matter of having the data right there saying this is what is going to happen exactly. It's having that mindset of looking beyond what is going on right now. And that's what I believe foresight is. It's not looking at it right now. It's not predicting. It's saying the possibilities. And people need to think beyond. I mean, you have to have Star Trek thinking when you are looking at these areas. You really do have to think beyond. I mean, if we can believe that Lord of the Rings, that there are wizards and there are elves, why can we not think beyond what we have in the technology that we're using? That's the applied thinking method you need to use in order for this to really be robust in our profession.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I just want to recognize that Meg Edwin,
yes, please.
Forgive me if I'm not pronouncing your last name correctly, asked a wonderful question, which is, outside of speaking to other experts, how would you recommend broadening our imagination on what may come on the horizon? Also, do you think experts in the field will suffer a self-assurance bias? And to that last one, hell yes. I see that happening all the time, because I have to say that the higher up we go in terms of sort of seniority in our field, the more susceptible we might be to hubris, and we might, I think, so sort of subscribe to our own greatness. And I think it's really important that we kind of to treat ourselves like the Romans did to Caesar, right? Just have somebody kind of flogging you and whispering in your ear how mortal you are and how fallible you are. But I think that to your question about how you recommend broadening our imagination, first of all, it is not a solo activity. That has to be underscored, because too often we feel that is. And what this needs to be, so what we need to do is we need to broaden this into multiple teams, not just even one team. So it's one thing if you have, say, your own foresight team within your own organization or a foresight advisory group. That's great. And it should, by the way, be, cross-sectional, intersectional, right? But it's also really important that you also look outside your own organization, to all the various experts and so forth, and especially those, who tend to be visionary in their own fields. And if you don't have direct access to them, watch their podcasts, right? Listen to their, YouTube videos and so forth. There's a lot of material out there that kind of stretches the mind, and you go, wow. The other thing too is that when you do have access to your teams, gamify. Gamify sparks creativity, and what you want to do is just have what if games, what about games, why not games, and bring those together. If you have access, the means for this, tap into a Delphi group of some sort. It doesn't necessarily even have to be a formal survey-based Delphi group, but just a sort of a Delphi expert panel that you can tap into. So there are a number of ways that you can do this. The other dimension you have too is broadening the time horizon. That is the most challenging for people because the conditions are changing. So I had mentioned before, when we're working on two dimensions, the X and Y dimensions, looking at maybe a couple of different factors. When you introduce that time, that Z or Z dimension, that Z dimension also, it's a line. A line has infinite points. So you need to pick points that are relevant to your own organization and I love what was discussed earlier too. Arjan had mentioned whatever time horizon that you've got, double it. And also on the panel too, mentioning alignment with current priorities. So that already gives you a couple of three different points, right, at which you should be focusing. And so you pick those points and you start apply that to the technique that I mentioned before about the possibilities and then the limiters. And when you think about the limiters and the barriers, that's where you start thinking about the time horizons as those limiters and barriers will be applied, because limiters and barriers will change according to time because innovation will occur. So think, okay, well, within the next 12 months, will these limiters and barriers, be realistic? And what are the time frames, the ranges that are in that? Because you don't want to get too locked into a specific point in time too. You want to have a cushion so that should the time horizon shift a little bit in actual practice, you're not going to be blocked from seeing the signals that are in place, right, to the different indicators.
And I'm gonna jump in here, Cynthia, and I'm gonna also mention the fact that it's not about just looking for the experts beyond or looking for people outside of your particular organization. It's also looking for opinions and people that are working on something similar, but they're not looking at your, say, sports, say music, say fashion. It is about really accessing across industry of insight, not just based on what you're specifically working on. You're in the automotive section and you may be dealing with whatever. You can go and look at somebody who's working in fashion. You'd be quite surprised, especially when it is in the area of the NFT or what's going on in the metaverse. Everything is intersected and cross. I mean, you get the best ideas. There are newsletters out there. The Future Party, I love that newsletter. It's about reading different types of journals, about subscribing to different blogs, different networks that are sometimes you think not connected. You think about, as I said, sports, the little eyelets that go on your shoelaces. That's related because those are made of plastics. And guess what? That's also related if you're working in automotive and it's going about tires. It's going about everything is related in some way, shape, or form, especially when it comes down to hardware and it comes down to the materials that go into building those pieces of equipment, sporting equipment, your clothing, fibers, whatever you're doing. It's all connected. So sometimes it's just a matter about getting those different perspectives with how they're using the technology, with how they're using it in order to be quote unquote predictive with what they're doing. So it really is mindsets before everything else. I always think it's mindsets before skill sets, because we can all acquire a skill, but it's all about the mind before you can acquire the skill. I think somebody said something similar earlier. So but I really do think it is about speaking to people in a wide sector of industries and areas, And I'll tell you what, there is nothing like talking to an 8-year-old child for understanding what is going on. I had my little niece here yesterday, and she was playing Roblox. She was doing something that I know how to play it. I played it in a different way. And she was doing things that I didn't actually ever clock. So it's always just about those different perspectives, the way the brain fires differently. I always say be more kid. And it's always about changing your mindset when you are doing what you're doing, when you're applying the methods that Cynthia has talked about. You really need to be thinking, oh crap. you need to go beyond that. We really do. And what August was saying about social media. There's a great many things about social media, and we all have our preconceived notions about it always being bad. But I would say you can filter out the things that are absolutely unnecessarily not wanting to be in your brain pattern. You can filter those out, but it is a treasure trove, because social media is just really reflective of the world. Everything that we do in the metaverse, everything we're doing with technology is a reflection of what we have in the world. So, as you do with your life, you can filter out some bad things. You should be doing that also. There was a question in here. Somebody made a point, and I lost it because I was just flicking.
In the meantime, I know August always has some good thoughts. So
Well,
what are you thinking as you're listening to?
Yeah, so one of the things I want to go back to is kind of that premise of, how did the profession miss social media? And to be very fair to the profession, it didn't entirely miss social media, because Suki, you were there, I was there, a number of others were there, and very, very adamant adopters. I guess, the challenge I would give to CI professionals, and maybe this is something that's more prevalent amongst foresight professionals, is even if you don't necessarily agree with the premise, set up almost like your own private alternative competing hypothesis, where what would you say if that premise were true? So like, I hear about NFTs and I'm excited, but I'm also a little skeptical. But rather than just throw them at, it's not going to be a thing, I'm just kind of like, well, what would it look like if it were true? What sort of bundling and unbundling would happen if NFTs were realistic? What would that need to look like? Well, one of the things is blockchain would need to be a lot less energy intensive. Well, we are in the middle of a switch to proof of stake as opposed to proof of work for the Ethereum blockchain, upon which so many DeFi and NFT assets are built. So somebody just checked a box that maybe is something I have to update my priors on, how I might have been more dismissive of NFTs than necessarily I should have. So even though I haven't necessarily changed my mind about it, I've remained open to the possibility. I've had, at least a modicum of humility, I'll say, to recognize my first instinct could have been wrong about that.
Well, and to this point, August, McDonald's is exploring NFTs along with its metaverse strategies. So it's issued a number of patent. I'm sorry. It's applied for patents for virtual restaurants. And so where is it going to hold the virtual restaurants? But a lot of retailers are thinking, well, we've already been putting out special edition, tote bags or whatever.
Gucci's there, Nike's there, Adidas is there. So they're all working on this. They're actually have stores. Sorry, they actually. I mean, this. Calm down. Bring it back.
Reel it back in.
Bring it back. Yeah. But there are a lot of retailers already doing this. I mean, there you have RFKT doing stuff where they actually have stores now. People are paying for their lots, in the metaverse of what they're doing. And as Craig said, where are you how many digital communities are you a member of? This is important. I don't think people realize how important it is to join those Discord groups that are talking about the metaverse, that are talking about NFTs. That sometimes you're going, I do not understand anything that is said in this group, but you just say, hey, I don't understand, can somebody explain? And before you know it, you've got like 50 links where people have said, oh, read this article, read this article, read this explainer, and you're now knee deep in understanding what's going on and what it's about. So how many digital communities are you a member of? Thank you very much, Craig, for asking
That's a
that
great
question.
question.
Me personally, I couldn't tell you. I have way too many. But
and more of them are private, right? Would you say that you mentioned Discord groups? Maybe not. Maybe
yeah,
private
they're
overstating it.
private, but
Yeah.
with most, I'd say with most groups now, because they're wanting to leverage their communities, they're using platforms, unfortunately, and I am very biased on this, unfortunately, TikTok. I am very anti-TikTok. I was anti-TikTok before it became popular. Just, even Drew can tell you that. But they're using platforms, social media, very popular social media platforms, not just to talk about what they're doing. It's really to drive people to their Discord groups. They're using them as drivers. They post it. They don't follow anybody. They follow one person and they say, hey, come join our group. Come join this chat. And then you become members of those. Once you're in those communities, other people in those communities will invite you to join other communities. So that's really how you build your network of really. Oh, we have 1 minute. Sorry.
We had like
but
2 minutes ago. Yeah.
There are a lot of areas that I know people that are listening to this conversation could really add value. Don't be afraid. Throw in those comments afterwards. Connect with people on this call. Connect with Terry. He wrote a book. Sorry, I haven't read the book.
But we need rigor, though. Connecting is one thing, but we need to have mindset, process, frame to wrangle this, because the problem that we've had is, parting thought, right, is that we've been connected and we're overwhelmed with the connection. So we have to make the right connections, but then we need to be able to make sense of those connections. One last thought I want to just wrap up, because that was the McDonald's thought that I want to just wrap up on, is that we also need to pay attention to what some of these larger players are doing. So, so log on to what these, these retailers and, the corporations with huge resources, they've got over 100 people on their digital insights team, right? At McDonald's. So let that be your virtual team. Conduct some shadowing. We're Intel professionals. Let's shadow some of these groups to see what they're doing. And that helps us, again, manage the vast troves that are out there, so that we can maintain the focus that we need to. Otherwise, again, it's fire hose. So pay attention to what Shell is doing. They do great foresight work, and so they're really well aligned to these. McDonald's is another one. There are a lot of organizations that have begun to implement some of these. Will it stick? We don't know, but they're giving it a shot. We'll look at the patent applications, look at the peer review literature, right? Because those are early stage developments, that help us, get the early signals, and then, start to track other things along the way so that we can manage the noise.
And one of the things we also have to do, and as well as looking at those big players, is looking at those disruptors, looking at the disruptive companies, the small ones, watching out for those newsletters that come out that people go, oh, well, they only have this many. People pay attention. That is where you're going to see a lot of what's being driven. They're the ones that get bought by the large companies. Pay attention to what's going on in the art sector, what's going on in the music industry, fashion. Those are areas that are utilizing, and they're taking these technologies and they're doing what they do in different ways.
Yeah, it is a mistake, though, I think, if we look at this purely from the standpoint of disruptors. We need to look at
that's an addition.
We need to look at entities as transformers transformers, whether or not they're disruptors or enablers. And I think that sets us up for a better mindset for what the possibilities are, rather than looking for, sort of being anchored in sort of the negative aspects, or perhaps, just the limited aspects of what disruption can do. So anyway, I'm sorry for being on my soapbox.
That's semantics, though. That's semantics, because no one's going to say these are transformers.
It's
for
mental
us,
frame.
yes, that's for us. But
vital.
what happens is when we're looking at the media, they're going to say these are the disruptors. So you got to look out for that word, and maybe in your head it's the transformers, but they're disruptors to the greater media. So we have to make sure that we're aware of who they are. But yeah, I do like that word instead of using disruptors. So everybody go out there and make sure that we have disruptors being disrupted and being called transformers instead. And well, we're over time, and I got in trouble, so that's wrapping up. Thank you for making sure that I didn't completely go off the rails with my jet lag self, because it really has hit me hard. And thank you very much, Cynthia, for adding great depth and insight to this panel, which is why I made sure you were here. And August for being, as always, the voice of great reason.
Well, I do what I can. But thank you both so much. Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you to everybody that's participated in the chat. There's a lot of stuff in there, so get to copy and pasting, people. And as August has said, join our Slack group and also join us on LinkedIn. Slack is where we like to have our most robust discussions. So please do that. And now exiting for August to finish up.
Enjoy technology, people, and the future.
Yes,
Absolutely.
indeed.
We hope you enjoyed this session replay from the Council of Competitive Intelligence Fellows 2022 Summit, Foresight Now, Harness the Future. We also hope that you'll join us for future educational programming that advances the field of competitive intelligence and adjacent fields. If you'd like more information about future events, the Fellows, or our competitive intelligence community of practice, please visit the link in our Vimeo profile. Thank you so much.